Welcome, Gyno-Curious listeners. I am Dr. Amy Novat. We are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. I don't know about you, but I have, even as a physician, felt vulnerable and fearful in doctors' offices. Whether I was in the room to support a loved one or I was the patient myself, there were moments when I felt unseen, disregarded, and treated like a number in a long line of patients and visits. Even when I go for my routine checkup and I feel healthy, as I sit in the cold examination room, naked under a paper gown that I've already torn, I'm sure, I begin to invariably sweat, thinking about all the possible diagnoses that my colleague can deliver my way. I'm not typically an anxious person, but the experience of waiting for a doctor can be very provocative for most of us. The wait can feel like an eternity. And then, if one is meeting a new doctor, that can be even more challenging. The whole environment can be the perfect setup for feeling alone and unprotected. This doesn't feel like an environment for healing. So when I was chatting with my sister-in-law the other day, she was telling me her sister Brenda had just had a difficult encounter with a new doc. I thought that Brenda and I could discuss her experience with you, perhaps allowing us to develop a strategy and a response to a doctor's visit that makes you feel vulnerable and not listened to. A strategy to ensure you get the care you need. I'm not naive. This is not easy in the world of 15-minute visits and corporate medicine, but I would like to encourage all of us to speak up, demand to be seen and heard, and to let your clinician know about your concerns. Brenda Freeman is a 55-year-old woman who's a native Californian. She lives her life on a ranch and has been very fortunate to have great health and full access to medical care throughout her life. Welcome, Brenda. How are you today?
Hi, Amy. Thank you for having me. I'm well, thank you.
Great. So I guess let's just start with the story that you've shared with me and what happened when you went to visit a new doc recently.
I had chosen a new female doctor. I've always had a female doctor as my PCP, my primary care provider. And I booked that, but a man called me and I was quite surprised. He asked me a lot of routine questions. It was a quick phone call. And then I called the doctor's office after our phone conversation and I said, when I come in for my physical, I just want to confirm that I'll be seeing the female doctor that I chose. And the receptionist said, we can't guarantee that you get what you get. So I was a little disheartened over that. And I thought, should I even continue care with this office? But I had already done the blood work and I wanted to find out the results. So in April, I went in for my in-person visit and I was really anticipating seeing the female doctor that I chose. And the nurse took my vitals and she said she was going to perform an EKG. I wasn't familiar with that. I don't know why I needed one. I don't have any heart issues or respiratory issues or anything that would warrant it. So I asked her why. She said that she didn't know why. And I said, well, I really don't want to run tests if I don't know why they're being done. So she put me in the exam room. I did not undress. I waited for the doctor. It's an uncomfortable situation. It was a new office and I was already feeling kind of unsteady about the whole thing. A male doctor walked in and asked me, the first thing he said, there was no introduction. There was no courtesy given at all. He started right off saying, why don't you want an EKG? And I asked him why. And he said that all his new patients needed for a base so that he has a baseline. And I said, maybe we can do it later. I'm not comfortable doing that right now. I don't really think it's necessary. And he said, okay, I'm going to write on your file that you refuse EKG. I said, okay. And then he said, also, you have high cholesterol and you have to start a statin. I was really taken aback by that. I said, yikes. I don't want to take a statin. I don't take any prescription drugs at all. I prefer something alternative. Can we discuss other things? He said, this is what you have to do. He said, your numbers are high and you have to go on a statin right away. And I said, well, I'm not taking any prescription drugs. And he said, okay, I am writing on your file, you refuse statin.
There you go.
I know.
It's really remarkable how often I hear that from my own patients when they tell me about their experiences with other clinicians, that they describe when they say, I do not want to do that. The doctor says, I will be documenting that you refuse this. And there's a reason from the doctor's perspective of it's called against medical advice. And there's, we live in such a litigious world right now that doctors unfortunately have to document to some degree when a patient says no to a recommendation. But I do believe there's a way in which we can communicate, why don't you want to accept it? What are your thoughts? Rather than just throwing you into the refusal pile. But keep going.
That was pretty much it. He was irritated with me. I was not trying to be combative. I was simply trying to find out why, and I would have preferred an explanation. I will tell you that I didn't appreciate not seeing the doctor that I chose. So I was put off by that. He slammed his laptop closed and got up and walked out. And that was the end of our interaction. It was over. And I was just sitting there dumbfounded, confused. I didn't really understand what happened. It was like not even 5 minutes of seeing him, and he was very dismissive. It was like no other experience I've ever had with a doctor in a doctor's office ever. I mean, you mentioned 15 minutes. I didn't even have that. So I also thought, how should I have handled this better? Should I have been more accommodating to the nurse from the get-go with the EKG? Should I have smiled more? I don't know. I don't know what I should have done to make him not be so mad at me. I don't know. I don't know if any of this was my fault. Maybe he was just having a bad day and he thought he could vent on me, but
it's so tough. It's such a unique dyad in a doctor's office, right? Where I don't think there's anyone who doesn't feel a sense of vulnerability in that role. And can you imagine how it feels if, for example, in this country, English isn't your first language, or one is poorly educated, or one is ill? You're talking about entering a doctor's office where you felt healthy. You were there to kind of, it sounds just an annual checkup. So imagine being in pain or carrying the load of a chronic, difficult diagnosis. Talk about vulnerability. And so it's part of what I had hoped that we would do this morning in our conversation is create strategies. And you ask an interesting question. It's as the physician in the room, I'm frequently asking myself, how do I make sure that this visit goes well for the patient? How do I make sure I'm listening better? How do I make sure I understand what's going on? Because sometimes, even in the best of situations, someone has a hard time describing what's going on with them. So then there's the question of the patient and his or her role in the environment. And it's so confusing. So I want to honor you for even asking the question, because there are certainly plenty of, I think, patients who walk into an exam room who don't ask, okay, what's my responsibility here too? And I think both parties have a way in which they can make the experience clearer, honest, and hopefully with the end result of health and well-being.
I agree. It should be a mutual exchange when you're establishing care. I would have appreciated if he asked maybe, what's changed since in the last month since we spoke on the phone? What concerns do you have? Why are you having a physical? Is this just routine wellness, or do you have any concerns we should talk about? There were probably a dozen things that he could have asked me or brought up to show that he cared, about me as a patient, even just the courtesy of introducing himself and asking how I am or shaking my hand, making eye contact, just basic courtesies, none of which were given. And I was in a reactive state. I remember thinking, I'm just bouncing off of all these things that he's barking at me. But I will definitely be more prepared. I've already been doctor shopping and I've chosen another female doctor. And I'm going to be a little bit more proactive and not just wait and see what happens when I go to this new office. I'm going to make a list of my concerns, maybe on a little card or my phone. I don't like looking at my phone when I'm with people, so it'll probably be on a little index card. And just so that I feel like I'm in more control of the situation, because ultimately it's an interview process, and I need to find a good fit. I need to be with somebody that I feel comfortable with. And I feel like having a female doctor sets me off on the right track. At least she has the same lady parts. Regardless of her age, there's probably some mutual shared experiences. I think that for the average person, my best advice would be proactive and honestly listen to your gut. Listen to when something doesn't feel right, when somebody you've just met is telling you to take a very serious prescription. Don't just run to the pharmacy and start taking pills. Think about how your body feels and do your own research. And you might want to take that prescription, but gather as much information as you can. Just don't take everything for 100% on what they're telling you. Like, you do have to do your own research.
Yeah. And I want to point out that we're all, if you will, quote unquote, average in a doctor's office. There's nothing more equalizing than being in a doctor's office naked, waiting for news that might be difficult or even good, but it's still, we're all human. And for me, I think we all feel our own mortality in a doctor's office. We're all afraid of hearing bad news. And the relationship with a doctor or clinician is a very unique one. They tend to know so much more about the human body than most folks. And they're also being pressured by a system that is so cumbersome and impersonal. So what you're speaking about, how to learn how to speak up, can be so hard. And it's a practice. It really is a practice. That, are you going to get it right the first time? Probably not. Are you going to get it right the second time? You're going to get it better. That every time you meet with a clinician, using strategies that empower you is going to be important. And everybody has a different way of doing that for themselves. But I want to point out some things that you've said, and I want to reiterate as some of these strategies. So the first thing is, I suggest, and I'm speaking to clinicians who are coming up behind me, if you will, who are residents and medical students and nurse practitioners, anyone who's going to be, if you will, in that role of taking care of other human beings. And then to patients, that we always should demand that there's an introduction. Who are you? You can't just walk into a room. I don't care where you are, but you can't walk into a room and start, first of all, making demands, do an EKG, take a statin, without introducing yourself. Again, as you pointed out, this is just basic human courtesy. You also want to request that you be fully dressed when you meet a new doctor. I feel really strongly about that. Talk about being vulnerable. I don't care what gender parts you have, one doesn't feel particularly empowered when you are naked. And so also, if you're in a room with a clinician that makes you uncomfortable, everyone has a right to ask that a nurse be in the room as well. Having a third party there can be extremely helpful. And I don't want to be sexist, but particularly if you're a vulva haver and you're with a male doctor, there should, first of all, there should never be a pelvic exam without a nurse in the room. But even if they're listening to your heart and your lungs, these are still your body parts that you have a right to feel safe around being examined. You also always have a right to ask for clarification, that if a provider is unclear, you get to say, I don't get what you're talking about. Can you speak English? Or, change, meaning that medicalese is not understood by everybody, that you have to take the medical language and break it down to simpler language for, quite frankly, most of us. Even if I go to see a specialist who, I learned about, let's just say I went to see a cardiologist. I learned about the heart a long time ago, all those details. And I don't read medical journals on cardiology at this point in my career. So if I had a medical problem with my heart, I would need my colleague to break it down. And I will do that. If I go see a specialist, I'll start with saying, pretend I'm not an MD. Pretend that I didn't go to medical school. I need you to talk to me like you would speak to someone who has not got that training. Because again, part of what happens in a doctor's office is, and there's science to document this, we hear only about 20 to 30% of what a doctor says. The rest of it is blah, 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 blah. And it's because we're nervous, because we're afraid, because we don't understand, because we're freezing, because I don't know, all those other things that happen. Yeah.
So true. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again,
Nothing worse than feeling forgotten in a paper gown and just sitting there, and it's just agony. It's awful.
Yeah. And I don't want to sound naive, and I am probably one of the greater critics of what's going on in medicine today, but to be empathic and sympathetic also towards my colleagues. We are working in an environment that is really difficult, and that we are being pressured to see patients very quickly. We are being asked to generate billing. It's become a factory.
And do it perfectly.
Oh,
you can't make any mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I understand that. I haven't given any negative review for this particular doctor or his office or the medical group. I'm not out to slam anybody. I do feel like some bedside manner training could be used by this person. And I feel it's so important. You talked about being empathetic to the patient when you're in the powerful doctor role. That should be a part of medical school, of some bedside manner, common courtesies, how to behave to put the patient at ease and to address their concerns and make them feel comfortable right from the beginning. Do they teach that?
They do now. They do now. I interviewed a resident some episodes ago a resident in OBGYN, and she from medical school was getting tutelage in how to interface and talk to folks. And like any other career, profession, there's going to be individuals who are just naturally proficient at communicating, and then there are going to be others who are not so good. And hopefully there can be training, and not just in medical school or in residencies, but every day being open to learning about, wow, that didn't work, this might. And again, what's so interesting for me is the exchange can be so profoundly helpful to both the clinician and the patient. Not only does the patient get what he or she needs, but the doctor gains information so that a diagnosis can be made more easily, so an understanding of the individual can be had more readily. And just on a personal note, there is nothing more satisfying for me as a professional to have an exchange with someone that feels positive. It's so empowering. So I guess I'd ask, how would you address the concerns that you had around the experience you had with the medical office that you had? How would you feed back that information? Because I think that's actually, rather than just being negative on Facebook, but how would you perhaps call the office and say, I'm asking you to give information to everyone out there. Like, what would you recommend that would empower you and help you heal from that experience and others can learn from?
So my concern moving forward are the patients that he sees that would be treated the same way and maybe just accept it and go along with it and not leave. I can't imagine that I'm the only person that he's treating like that. I didn't want to be reactionary and just do it right after the appointment. I was thinking about contacting the office and seeing if there was maybe an office manager, having a conversation about my appointment in a way that could maybe help him realize how he affected me and maybe do some modifications in his approach. Because I'm not out to attack anybody, but maybe he's just not self aware. Maybe he doesn't realize that coming in and barking at people is really the best approach. If he treats me, a new patient, that way, how is he treating the office staff or the nurses and other people he works with? That sounds like a miserable environment. I don't know. I feel like they need to know the way he treated me, not because I want to be punitive, but because I want to maybe help modify his behavior or at least bring light to it and help any other future patients that he'll be with. Or maybe he just needs somebody else in the room. There was nobody in the room with us.
Yeah.
Maybe he needs a shadow or something for a little while.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate your point of view and approach because you've never used the word angry. And I want to just highlight that to you and to our audience because anger can be divisive and it's not particularly helpful in this environment. And not that we don't feel anger after this kind of experience. I want to be honest about it, but at the same time, when calls are made to offices and it's just rancor and fuming, it doesn't help. Everyone gets defensive and it doesn't help. So I think
Right.
you bring up this important issue is most people who work in healing offices really do want to help people. They really do. So trying to build a relationship with someone in the office, whether it's the office manager or speaking to the doctor's nurse or even the front desk person, if it was something about your experience at the front desk, and just being patient with those individuals, having a conversation that may just be instructive and helpful, I really hope can go a long way. And remember, if you're right, I don't think you're the first person to experience that with that physician. And if there's a number of people calling in with the same comment, I'd like to think that there
Right.
is someone responding to that and someone taking
Here's
this
a nod.
person aside and just helping them grow and learn and become a better clinician for themselves. Because trust me, that kind of attitude after a while is toxic to an individual too. I think you've brought up so many issues, and I want to remind everyone, just like Brenda has, that she's decided she's going to look for a different practitioner. That even in the world of insurance, where we sometimes feel like we don't have a lot of options, that hopefully there's an opportunity to find another clinician, a different environment in which you can seek help and be healed. And that making those changes is okay. I have patients who come into my office who feel a sense of shame that they left another clinician's office. They feel guilty. And I want to just empower everyone out there that are you have the right and in a way the responsibility to your health and body to make those changes so that you can be heard, so you can be seen, so you can be taken care of in the manner in which you want to be taken care of. Nothing will shift in the medical environs unless patients and clinicians demand huge changes. Big box medicine and its relationship with the insurance and pharmaceutical industries does respond to financial forces. And if we take our healthcare dollars to an alternative office, clinician, or
Mhm.
hospital in protest to poor care, I do believe eventually this system might shift. But boy, we have a lot of work to do. And it can be
Yeah.
extremely intimidating and scary to make these shifts and demand change. Brenda, I want to thank you for being honest and open with us this morning and sharing your story with us. And I hope you stay healthy and well in the face of all of these challenges. Be well. Thank you also to my listeners for joining me as we venture into the limitless conversations about our bodies and the world of OBGYN. I would love to hear from you. Please email your questions and comments to comments@radiofreerhiniecliff.org or call us at 845-307-7446. Also, thank you to my producers, Jen Hammoud and Matty Rosenberg. Until our next conversation, stay healthy and stand strong in your knowledge and your insights.